Steve Nash won 2 MVPs, led the league in assists 5 times, and played on some of the best regular season offenses in NBA history. But was he just the beneficiary of great teammates and an offensive system that was doomed to fail in the playoffs? Or was he actually dominant in the postseason? Is he on the short list of the best passers to ever play? And at his peak, was he actually the best offensive player of all time?
You are watching what greatness is all about.
Where's Larry Bird in all this?
Has it blocked by Elijah Wan.
Michael Jordan saves the day.
The first season of Greatest Peaks was about the best of the best. But this time we're looking at trendsetters, unique archetypes, and even controversial players who make up the legends of NBA offense.
Steve was just a headache because he could do it all.
Without being fast.
Steve and Stephon Marbury gave me the most problems. Gave me the most problems.
In 2005, Steve Nash averaged just 16 points a game, but he exerted more constant pressure on defenses than anyone else in the league. The Suns' mantra then was 7 seconds or less. But that wasn't just about playing in transition. It was about acting quickly and decisively to strain defenses, and I'm not sure anyone in NBA history did that better than Nash. This is off a made basket. Nash's defender is out of position, so he runs out ahead of him. That forces extra defenders to help, so he finds an open shooter 3 seconds into the shot clock. This time Nash brings it up, feels a little too much space, and bombs a 3 on Michael Finley. And pull-up threes in transition were rarer back then, but if defenders didn't pick him up, he loved running into this shot. Someone like Bruce Bowen knew to pick him up at the three-point line, so Nash fakes the pull-up 3 with some filthy ball handling and turns it into a layup with a perfect pass. This one is off a miss, and again, look how quickly Nash runs it down San Antonio's throat, buckles 2 players, and goes to layupville. And Nash's ability to pull up or drive and score strain defenses to the breaking point, because when additional defenders pay attention to him, he guts teams with his passing. And this all started with Jason Richardson sprinting out on the wing, which forced Nash's man to call for Duncan to temporarily switch, and right here it's a layup because Nash knows the defender is about 2 feet too high and the lane is open. Here's one off a make where the Spurs look set, but Shawn Marion outsprints 2 centers. Manu Ginobili sees this and heroically rotates, but Nash just hits the wide open shooter instead, and the man might be Dr. Strange. So defenses are scrambling to match up with his teammates to plug up his passing chances, and then he just stops on a dime for a little mid-ranger. This time he's skipping into the front court, goes to set up the mid-range, and when help comes, jump passes for free throws instead. But when the Spurs match up well with his teammates, he instantly recognizes that both bigs are away from the basket, crosses over, and scoops in a layup. Nash was never the quickest or fastest, but this hanging, herky-jerky dribble made him a true triple threat everywhere he went with the ball. He could blow by his man, pausing to leave Kobe Bryant swaying in the wind. With that same hesitation dribble, he could hop right into his shooting pocket, and he could blend that same dribble move into a pass at any time. In other words, his ball handling let him dribble around defenders with a hairpin trigger to drop dimes. And this unlocks everything all the time because he can snap off a pass here, but if it's too tight, he can just keep on dribbling and then fire one left-handed for a layup anyway. Having a hairpin trigger to pass or shoot was a huge deal, because Nash is one of the greatest shooters ever. hitting 43% of his threes on moderate volume for his career, and he was extraordinary from the mid-range too, shooting nearly 50% from the short and long mid-range areas, and his best 5-year stretch was 10% ahead of league average, a mark no one would pass until Kevin Durant did it over a decade later. That means he was always a nanosecond away from finding a high-value play. If you're too close to him and freeze on the hesitation, he drives and immediately exposes any help. But his own shots were insanely accurate once he created space to shoot over defenders of all sizes. He didn't need to be set either, because his balance let him flow into one-legged runners like this, and that balance was the very thing that gave him 360-degree ball handling, moving in every direction while keeping the dribble alive. Nash was so comfortable dribbling in traffic that it was like he had a force field around him, double tapping it quickly under a defender so he could continue probing for something better. And I'm not sure anyone ever kept their dribble active while exploring every nook and cranny of the paint, trying to twist up the defense quite like Nash. He used to literally circle under the net like Wayne Gretzky looking for pay dirt, and even today this is known as nashing, and it can tie defense into knots. Two players stay with Steve here, and that creates confusion when he comes out the other side, and none of this shows up in a box score, but he's basically stress testing defenses with these probing dribbles, and they often crack. There's a natural tendency for defenders to collapse into the paint on penetration, and that leaves shooters open. But if Nash wasn't surrounded by bodies, he could keep dribbling or suddenly shoot. The Spurs push him down to the baseline here. Duncan assumes he's circling out the other side, but he cuts him off for a layup instead. So a help defender needs to be on alert for this, and when Nash starts tunneling into the paint, it frees up a wide open corner three. And this one messes with multiple defenders. Amar'e Stoudemire is dangerous rolling into space, so Ginobili and Duncan eye him, and when Nash gets under the net, Duncan wisely stays with him, and that pass doesn't even make sense. Tony Parker actually jumps in front of Amar'e, but because nashing is confusing, Parker thinks he should rotate out on this pass, and Steve pulls a rabbit out of his hat. Nash's hyper-secure ball handling and crafty use of his body made it tricky to keep him from touching the paint. Notice no one helps this time, so he just grinds his way to the rim for three the old-fashioned way. And this is some of the most functionally effective dribbling ever, plowing through defenders like they don't have arms, just daring people to reach for the ball, and that foray near the net leads to a switch. Help comes on the drive, and Nash keeps dribbling to find a wide open three up top. Come on. This one is more subtle, racing up to turn the corner on a screen. He could shoot here, but decelerates and moves backwards with an escape dribble, and he only picks it up when he finds something better. Think about how this crazy ball handling and ability to shield defenders with his body fits with his live dribble passing. He's bouncing around on the baseline here, seals Parker, and all of a sudden it's a layup. And Nash cranked that window open by faking Duncan right off the court. So he was constantly applying pressure, looking for these home runs, and his combination of skills made him deadly with a live dribble because he could unlock anyone on the court at any given time, and that made him perfect for an offense built around the oldest play in the book.
But Kenny, Coach Reggie, was he true MVP or was he a sympathy MVP?
No, he was a true MVP.
Over me? Twice?
In the 1990s, John Stockton and Karl Malone were synonymous with the pick and roll, often setting it up on the wing and playing a basic two-man game. But Nash took the pick and roll from analog to digital. His incredible ball handling made him a master of setting up screens, crossing back into the pick, then veering into traffic for a little fadeaway. And he loves snaking across the lane like this, again, setting up his defender, then slicing across the paint, where an extra defender's helping this time, so he flips it out for an easy 3. Look at this one, where he's briefly pressured by a second defender, then runs his man back into his teammate as a screen to find a soft spot for a little pull-up. And then later in the quarter, snakes hard across the lane. The big man helps on him, so the backup plan is a wide open 3 for a teammate. Because Nash is comfortable with physicality, he can take contact from defenders and keep going, and some of his footwork was beautiful on these. This time he crosses over to snake the screen and throws an up fake for a little leaner, and here's the exact same setup against good friend Dirk Nowitkzi, but instead it's an up and under step through. Here he has a ton of space to attack because Duncan's in a drop, so he hops to the elbow and could shoot, but he's always looking for something better and just waits for a layup opportunity. When defenders start anticipating the snake, he can fake it with an in and out dribble, and that completely buckles Duncan, leaving Nash wide open. And after seeing this a ton, the Spurs actually stay with the fake snake, so he lasers it to Amar'e for a dunk. Nash's timing and patience in pick and roll was pristine, waiting with that hesitation dribble before the roller breaks free. And since they missed the layup, Steve tees one up again, but the second time wasn't the charm. That hanging hesitation dribble was also perfect for pocket passes to the roll man, and I'm not sure I've ever seen a better pocket passer than Stephen John Nash. He could snap these out of the air with either hand, and he delivered these passes with surgical precision, spinning this one right under Tim Duncan's fingertips and almost hitting his shoe to hook up Stoudemire. Remember, if Nash's defender went under the screen to take away that roll pass, that just gave him space for a deadly mid-ranger. And if the big man stepped out to slow him down, even if he grabbed Stoudemire, Nash could exploit that with a drive and a what? If teams tried to switch the pick and roll, that created multiple problems. First, Nash would look to punish a size mismatch down in the post. And most big defenders couldn't stay with him on the outside, so they'd need help on penetration, and that's too easy for him. And I guess the best scenario is the big man sags off him, but then he just starts cooking him from the mid-range. The Lakers tried everything in the 2010 Western Finals, bringing Lamar Odom near the level of the screen, so he just flows into an elbow floater. So they mixed in a soft trap to slow him down while overloading on the roll man, but that just freed up a three-point shooter. And down the stretch, that hard hedge turned into a late switch because they were concerned about the roller, and that left Nash isolated against a big man, and even at 36, these mid-rangers were efficient. Although they prefer that to a more traditional coverage where this looks covered, but it's somehow a layup. And again, in Game 5, they sag off him with the big man and send the guard over the screen with a third defender sliding to help. And right about here, LA's in trouble because Nash is a pick and roll wizard. Here's one where the big man comes to the level of the screen, Odom is sitting in the path of the roller, and Kobe takes away the baseline pass, and shooters are open, but Nash turns it into a layup, and he basically dares Kobe to move, fakes Odom out of the way, and turns water into wine. Nash generated so many layups for his teammates because he was always looking for something better. He's in semi-transition here, crosses over Parker, then seals him off for a little leaner, but this defender watches him for a split second, and that's all it takes for Nash. And on a play like this, most ball handlers kick it out to the shooter, but Nash literally follows his roll man down the lane. Watch this play and think about what the best pass is. And it already happened because Nash realized only Amar'e was ready for a lob near the hoop. From 2005 to 2010, no one threw more layup passes than Steve Nash, and these passes for layups made up about 50% of all his assists. The creativity to even imagine some of these passes is a big reason Nash unearthed such high percentage offense. Instead of forcing a highly contested 2 on this one, he gets parallel to the floor to sling it cross court to a shooter, and he was especially creative on the interior, skating around the paint to set up passes from another dimension. This is one of my favorite passes ever. There are 4 seconds on the shot clock in a nail biter, and Nash drives and passes it around a defender at the buzzer, and watch him reach around Ron Artest's back here for the handoff to cut it to 1. And this one might be better, down 3 in the waning minutes against Duncan on a switch, driving left, and then what is that?
Just give it to little Stevie and get out of his way and then come in behind him.
Nash actually used behind the back passes to hit the roll man, and this was functional because when defenses took away the pocket pass, he could still hit the roller with a head of steam. He could do this in pick and pop to make it a little easier for a shooter, or in that roll game. He's looking for Stoudemire here, but can't quite find the angle, so he uses a ball fake to distract Duncan, turn him around, and give Amar'e an easy layup. On the very next play, with a 1-point lead, they go back to the pick and roll. Nash again goes behind the back, and this time Stoudemire does the rest. And Nash absolutely eviscerated Duncan in these screen and rolls in their playoff battles. We tracked the entire 2007 series, and in 105 Nash pick and rolls against Duncan, the Suns generated a 131 offensive rating, and in the 5 games with Amar'e, that number was a mind-bending 145 points per 100. In many ways, this was an omen of the ensuing pace and space era, where less mobile big men were played off the court, because they ran out of answers against multi-dimensional pick-and-roll weapons who could pass, drive, or pull up from deep off the dribble. The Spurs actually tried trapping Nash at times in 2005, and they probably should have tried this more because it took the ball out of his hands and forced someone else on the Suns to beat them. Because he was only about 6'3", I do think size could bother Nash a little on a play like this. Pau Gasol's huge frame probably blocks the pass to Stoudemire, although they end up getting a dunk anyway. And it's just harder for smaller players to hit some of these passes over the top of bigger defenders. Nash converted such a high percentage of his passing chances that it was surprising when he missed one, although he still had a good idea in mind here, and he did use the lob in creative ways, throwing this when his target was 15 feet from the hoop, and he used this as a way to combat bigger defenders in pick and roll, feathering it over the top to Marion. This one is particularly advanced, recognizing a mismatch and tossing it in front of the rim for Marion to outjump smaller defenders. Although some of these wild ideas came with the risk of turnovers. That pass went right through Marion's hands, but sometimes an intended receiver will slow up a little bit, and sometimes the idea is just a bit too ambitious. Of course, most of Nash's ideas worked, and his creativity and anticipation made him the most voluminous high-leverage passer I've ever tracked. And that's an enormous reason why Phoenix's offenses were historically great with Nash. At their 3-year peak, the Suns were nearly 10 points better per 100 than league average with Nash on the court. That was 2 points better than any other team. So, how much credit does Nash deserve for these league-best offenses? After all, if the Suns were so good with him, why didn't he have more success back when he played with Dirk Nowitkzi?
Do you feel like the things that, plagued you in those 2 losses are getting better in this one?
I think so.
Before Nash's record-setting offenses in Phoenix, he played on record-setting offenses in Dallas. Only when Steve went to the bench, they were still one of the best offenses in the league as long as Dirk was on the floor. So it's not surprising that Dallas's offenses hummed after Nash left. This is the same graph we just saw, and the Mavs look like the second most efficient team in the league after replacing Nash with Jason Terry. So how could Steve look so indispensable in Phoenix, yet so expendable in Dallas? Well, first, he changed as a player. His moves weren't quite as sharp back then, he didn't have the same conditioning to constantly pressure defenses, and his balance was a little less reliable. Dirk was also a major focal point of those teams. They often played through his mid and high post isolations, and those Mavs were just offensively centric in general, so they could send Nash away from the action where he'd harmlessly idle while others went to work. Nash's off-ball game is interesting because he was dangerous up-faking and attacking closeouts, and he could catch and go as a way to playmake in the paint. Naturally, he was also an elite spot-up shooter, and he hit a ton of big shots in his career, running and twisting into catch-and-shoot threes. In 2010, coach Alvin Gentry even ran a few off-ball sets for him like this, although Nash wasn't great at running around and separating away from the ball, and I don't think these kinds of curling, twisting shots were his forte. The bigger issue with playing him away from the ball is that you lose that decision-making prowess, which is outsourced to more traditional post-ups or isolation scorers who lack his ability to pressure defenses the same way. In Dallas, other ball handlers like Michael Finley or Nick Van Exel would orchestrate the play at times, and while they both made all-star teams because of their offense, they weren't offensive quarterbacks like Nash. Compared to Phoenix, Steve almost looked passive at times as a Maverick, receiving instructions for a set play and then going through the motions instead of attacking this space or recognizing Sacramento's confused matching up. And then he goes and stands in the corner just like he's any other point guard. There were also officiating changes in the 2005 season that meant defenders couldn't be this physical with him when he was dribbling. But I think a much bigger factor in Phoenix was having a dangerous roll man to play with. Most Dallas screeners like to pop after setting the pick, which took away Nash's best playmaking weapon, those lightning-quick pocket passes and connections on the interior. On the other hand, Amar'e was the ultimate role partner because of his agility and tensile strength in the air. He could catch on the run into space and make a quick move to finish himself, and he had amazing hands on these tight little passes on the inside. Compare that to a backup like Stephen Hunter, who has space to attack but lacks Stoudemire's finishing package, whereas Amar'e could go around big defenders or take them on directly in the air. And what synergy here for Nash to read the defender and expect Amar'e to slip before he even takes a step, and that's what unlocks the three-point play. Spacing was actually a big principle under coach Mike D'Antoni, and Phoenix spread the floor with shooters to exploit slower traditional defenders with quicker players like Stoudemire. Playing smaller certainly hurt Phoenix's defense, but the offense more than made up for it with the extra skill next to good shooting. And the spacing on some of these sets looks downright futuristic compared to other teams back then. That space gave Nash more room to roam the paint himself compared to prior seasons in Dallas. So these principles certainly juiced the Suns' efficiency and amplified Nash's strengths. Phoenix actually played a more traditional lineup in 2006 with the defensively minded Kurt Thomas replacing Amar'e at center, leaving Diaw and Nash next to three good defenders. In Thomas's games, they were fourth in the league in defense and offense, so they weren't an historically great attack, but Nash still propelled them near the top of the league with his bag of tricks. When he went to the bench, those Suns offenses went from crushing the league to below average, one of the biggest regular season shifts on record. And with Stoudemire on the court, they were actually around league average without Nash. But look at how different the possessions look without their MVP. Amar'e wasn't spoon-fed quality shots and resorted to more ISO. And those quick-hitting actions weren't the same. The magical pick-and-roll passes vanished, and there was no one to probe the lane and create layups. Even when the offense broke down, Nash's isolation scoring was a good fallback option. And during his career in Phoenix, an extraordinary 94% of his two-pointers were unassisted, which is a staggering amount of self-generated offense for someone in the 96th percentile in scoring efficiency. His passing actually helped his scoring at times. The big man here is fixated on the roll pass and not Nash. And his pocket passes were so scary that sometimes just a fake could move a defender. The Mavs actually dared him to shoot for much of their series in 2005. Notice how no one leaves their man to help here. So Nash just torched this coverage by calling his own number more. He averaged a hyper-efficient 30 points per game in the series, pouring in 40 per night over the last 3 contests to eliminate his former team. And in rewatching Nash, I was really struck by how often he would take over playoff games like this down the stretch. This is the fourth quarter of the 2010 second round against San Antonio, and yes, this is the eye game, where Nash took a dunk and elbow that required 6 stitches, which is not to be confused with the nose game, where they couldn't stop the bleeding on a gash and faltered in a key stretch versus the Spurs with him on the bench. But in 2010, Steve just went out there with one eye, scoring 10 huge points in the final frame in a 35-point quarter from the Suns to close out this series. Every time down, it was Nash just going to work, using the look away here to hit a cutter, and they had no answers for him in these big moments. This is an absurd pass over the top to Amar'e, and even when the Spurs made a late run, Nash still had all the answers. Phoenix's playoff offense almost felt unstoppable at times, even in close losses. And when we adjust for opponent strength, those Suns produced by far the best 5-year run of playoff offense in NBA history, and that made them a great overall team, better than a number of championship winners from this perspective. D'Antoni's coaching helped, as did Phoenix's offense-first lineups, but Nash also influenced so many possessions despite just scoring 20 points per game. After his scoring exhibition against Dallas in 2005, the Mavs tried switching every pick and roll to start their 2006 series, and Nash just patiently set up the mismatch every time and exploited the defense that way. On this possession, the Suns hunted the mismatch, Dallas finally doubled, but that just sprung Nash to make more dunks for teammates. Down 9 with 3:30 left, Nash went to work on the switch, drawing free throws on this drive, and a minute later he came down in transition and just popped a 3 to cut it to 4. On the next possession, they run pick and roll and wait for the switch. Then they clear out the floor for him to go to work, and he hits Dirk with a ridiculous finish that could have been a 3-point play. But that's okay because the next time they double Diaw again, which leaves Nash open for a triple to cut it to 1. Next time it's more spread pick and roll, and oops, they don't switch. And in completely dominating his final 14 minutes on the court this game, Nash tallied just 10 points and 6 assists. And that's because an individual stat line can't capture the value of improving everyone else's shot quality. Amar'e, Marion, and so many others had their most efficient seasons playing next to Nash. And there's a popular idea today that he should have shot more threes back then, But I'm not convinced that was better than the warm-up shots he created for the entire team. He's probably not a great fit with other ball-dominant players, so I'm not sure if he's the best offensive player to ever play, but when he had the basketball, his incredible shooting, passing, ball handling, and decision-making made him unrivaled and an absolute offensive legend. Many of you have asked about getting clips from old games. USASportsOnDVD.com is my go-to place. I'll leave a link in the description below. Otherwise, to support us directly, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball is the best way to do that. We have a ton of historical stats there that we use to research these videos and our podcasts. Hope you enjoyed this one, and as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you are having a great day.